It's new camera day. Come on, do you seriously think I would go out and buy myself a brand new camera? With what money? Plus, what would the wife say about me? Well, she wouldn't really say too much. She would probably just go ahead and kill me. But yes, good morning. What about you? How's it going? I hope everything is well and you're a part of the world today. And today I have the honor of having a little run through and a little play with this bad boy here. So Panasonic have very kindly let me have a lend of this for a couple of days. This is their Panasonic G9 camera, which got released sort of end of 2017, early 2018. So I'm once again very thankful to Panasonic for letting me have this. Just want to run through some of the key features about it, some of the main features and my own thoughts while having this camera for a couple of days, because I really haven't had it this long, but I'm very thankful for the time that I have had. So I'm not going to worry too much about what all's in the box because there's not really much in there. You've got your charger, instruction manual, caps, of course the camera, the lens, the battery, blah blah blah. So I'm going to set that to the side. So this is the camera here. Why exactly did Panasonic bring this out? Well, Panasonic have been very heavily into the likes of their Micro Four Thirds mirrorless systems for the past number of years, especially when it comes to the likes of video work. Cameras like, say, the GH5 currently on the market, which is probably one of the best video cameras out there. Because Panasonic have been focusing so much on video, they wanted to bring out a camera that is truly dedicated to stills photography or just photographers in general. So that's why they brought out the G9. So straight out of the box, the camera actually holds really well. It's got a nice firm grip, really big grip on here, especially if you're like me and you have really big, long, lanky hands. Magnesium alloy body, so it is waterproof, dustproof, all those sorts of things. It'll take a good fair bit of knocking around in different conditions. Now, I got a lens of this with the Panasonic 12 to 63.5 to 5.6 lens. I would have loved to have had a play with the Leica version of this because it's not only a faster aperture, it's a Leica lens. Well, Leica lens, so to speak. So resolution wise, the camera is boasting a 20.3 megapixel Micro Four Thirds sensor. Panasonic, again, very patented in the whole Micro Four Thirds bit. Pretty tiny sensor and such, but again, not too bad, especially when it comes to carrying about things like lenses, because their lenses will be a lot more smaller, cameras will be a lot more smaller. The ideal point for mirrorless in general. So even though mirrorless is all about lightweight compactness, this is quite a chunky camera, but at the same time, it still feels nice and lightweight compared to even like carrying, say, a standard digital SLR or anything. I would probably rather carry something like this about than what I would an SLR. Much like many of the other Panasonic cameras that are out there, this comes with a 5-axis image stabilization built into the camera. Once paired up with an image stabilized lens, you have at least 6.5 stops of stabilization on here, which is absolutely fantastic. The one thing you'll notice with this camera, and it is a little bit daunting a lot of times, but it is still at the same time pretty good that they have a lot of these things listed out. There is a lot of buttons on here. Similar to the likes of like a high-end Canon or a high-end Nikon, they would have a button dedicated to something rather than having to go into the menu. Panasonic are doing basically the same here. So you have like a button for your white balance, your ISO, your compensation, you've got your LV, EVF control, your autofocus modes, quick menu, all those different things as well. On the top you of course have your standard mode dial, which gives you all your manual exposures, your automatic exposures, your scene modes and such. And just below that they have a little nice fancy red ring. What is it with camera companies and adding red rings and such to their cameras? And then below that you have your drive mode. So again, this is another good thing, that you don't have the drive mode all within a menu or the quick menu. It's all here. So you've got your single shooting, you have two continuous modes. Continuous 1 is set up to continuous shooting with the mechanical shutter. Setting 2 is set up to continuous shooting with the electronic shutter. So a little bit more on that later on. You have your 6K photo, which basically the camera records a 6K video and you can extract an 18 megapixel still from that. You have Panasonic's famous post-focus system as well, which means that it's really good for close-ups or landscapes where you can fine-tune the focus after you've taken the photo. You have your timer and of course your time lapse as well. So it is all a matter of a flick of a switch just to get to all these different drive modes. Much like many of the other Panasonic cameras that are out there, this does come with a full flip out screen. It's not as big as the Panasonic GH5. GH5 comes with a 3.2 inch touchscreen, whereas this is just a standard 3 inch. If this is something that bothers you, fair enough. If it doesn't, fair enough. And it is actually a really nice clear viewfinder. It's nice and responsive because it is touchscreen as well. So you can tap onto the screen where you want your focus to be, or just tap onto the screen for any of the menu functionalities. Makes life so much handier. You do also have a nice big EVF on here, so this can go to at least 0.3 times on the viewing mode. Now it is all electronic because it is mirrorless. There's no optical in here, it is digital. It is nice and clear, but there is a lot of times I find that if you're on the full resolution of the EVF, it can be quite weird looking at because it's so big. The corners and such will start to blur out and such. But there's a nice big eye cup around there that means you can press the camera a lot more closer to your eye. It means you're not going to get too much of a blur out or anything. You do also have a little button on the side that you can change the view mode to different magnifications. If you find that the bigger size just isn't doing for you, you can just decrease that size 2 times, so you can. If you're not too fussed on the touch screen, you do also have a joystick control that you can maneuver this about to change any of the menus, or mostly changing the autofocus points as well. So it is in a pretty nice location, just around where the thumb will pretty much be anyway. Now what Panasonic have added to this camera, and it's probably one of the first it's ever been on a mirrorless camera, is a top LCD screen, which you can view all your exposures, your drive modes and such and all on here, rather than having to go to the screen all the time. Much like Nikon and Canon would have this idea on a lot of their high-end SLRs, it's nice to see this on a mirrorless camera, and it just fits so well. It would be something I would love to see on a lot more mirrorless cameras. Even though we have this, we have the Fujifilm X-H1. I would love to see it on, like, say, another Sony A7 model or anything like that. And of course you have a little orange light on the inside, which, much like Nikon, you would give a flick of the power on switch just to turn on that little light. Now, speaking of that, much like Nikon business, to me, whenever I had this camera out and about with me around Belfast taking photos, which we're going to see more of that later on, hold-wise, field-wise, control-wise, I just felt this camera was very Nikon-esque. Like, I think this camera would probably be the great sort of baseline for when Nikon finally get doing their full-frame mirrorless cameras. I just think this is a good test for Nikon with their mirrorless cameras, but we're testing it on a Panasonic. So I don't know if this is something you have found if you own this camera, that it just feels very Nikon-esque, but that's just what I find with me. Other controls as well, you've got one on the front that lets you, now this can be set up to different things, but default it's set up to changing between the mechanical and the electronic shutter. So if you want to do your silent shooting, you can give it a flick of the switch and you can change it to your electronic shutter, so that way you're remaining a lot more quiet as well. Plus you can bounce it off with that really high continuous autofocus that it does offer, which, as a matter of fact, this camera does give you really fantastic continuous burst rates. On the mechanical shutter in continuous autofocus, it can shoot up to at least 20 frames per second, whereas on the electronic shutter, it can shoot at least up to 60 frames per second. So if you're very into your sports, your wildlife photography, this would certainly be a camera I would highly recommend for that style of photography. Other ports that you have on this camera is dual memory card slot, which are both UHS 2, so that means you can get some really nice fast memory cards in here, and then you can set up to have one memory card being RAW, one memory card being JPEG, entirely up to yourself. On the other side, you do have your mic input, your headphone input, an HDMI output, and a charger port, which is USB 3. Now this camera came with an external charger, which is pretty handy for taking the battery out and just putting it on, but if you do need to charge in the camera, it is USB 3 and it's nice and quick. One other port that you have is just by the memory card, you do also have your little remote port as well, so that you can put a little remote in there. But if you don't feel like getting a remote, this camera does have Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, standard sort of feature on a lot of cameras these days. Now, like I say, this camera wasn't designed for the likes of video users, but Panasonic have still put a lot of hefty video things into here. Like we mentioned, you got your mic and your headphone input there. 4K video this can go up to, as well as shooting in full HD. Now, it's by no means has the same sort of bit rate or anything like that compared to the GH5, but on this camera you can still shoot 4K at 60 frames per second, full HD at 180 frames per second, so that's still pretty good. But like I say, this camera isn't exactly designed for videographers, it's more designed for photographers. And I mean, I didn't personally get playing too much with the video features on here. I was more focusing on the still functionalities or the photography functionalities on here. But I'm sure, no doubt, much like many of the other Panasonic cameras that are out there for video, this still works an absolute treat. So what's great about this camera as well is it's one of the first Panasonic cameras to have what's known as a high resolution mode. What it really does is once we go into the menu and turn it on, we can then take a full 80 megapixel still. Now, there's some pros and there's cons, more on the con side than anything than there would be on the pro. What the pro side is, you're going to get a really nice high resolution image. This is really good if you're very into your landscape photography or just anything still related. This is where it comes to the cons, because that, again, just think of what I just said there, stills photography. You can't use that feature for the likes of moving subjects or anything because it will blur out in your images. So what the camera's actually doing is it's shifting the sensor a few times to get you that full high resolution image. So I did find that if there was something still, like in one of the images I'm showing here, it did keep everything really nice. Now, quality wise, I think it could be a little bit better. I don't know if that was to do with me or anything, but I just think it was okay. I wasn't too impressed by it. I think it has a lot of potential, and if it starts to come out on a lot more cameras and they can fix it up for all those different sort of things, then great, sure. ISO wise, this camera has a native ISO range of 200 to 25,600. Really high sensitivity range for quite a small sensor, and this is where again come to one of my downfalls about this camera, is that because I'm like a concert photographer, I can't really use that sort of sensor for concert photography. Because take a look at this example here. So this photograph was taken in Victoria Square in Belfast during their Wizard of Oz exhibition, and it's pretty well lit, it's all daylight. But what I had done here was I set my ISO to at least 800, which is quite low on the sensitivity, but if we look a lot closer into the image, you can see that there is quite a good fair bit of grain going on. Keep that in mind when you're sitting thinking about getting this camera for if you're wanting to do like low light photography. Yes, it boosts a high ISO range, but because of the small sensor, I find it really struggles. So that's one of my biggest downfalls about this camera, and it's probably going to be one of my biggest downfalls on a lot of the Panasonic cameras in general, is the small sensor size. Where the autofocus was concerned, it's very quick and it is really precise. I find a lot of times with still photography, it was struggled quite a wee bit. I'm not sure if that was the lens or anything at all, but when it came to the autofocus on continuous, I find it really got a pinpoint accuracy on moving subjects. Like I was just taking photographs of the buses going past, like you see here, and back that with the high burst rate as well. It basically looks like it's a video, so it does, it's that smooth. My other downside to this was, and it's something that it's not just in this camera, it's in most mirrorless cameras, is that the battery life, even though it's quite a big chunky battery, it still didn't last that long. Don't get me wrong, I was putting it through its paces with the 80 megapixels and the continuous shooting, but it got to at least about just under halfway within a day. So it did, whereas I probably could have got through a little bit more than that with the Sony. I don't know, I think it's just because I was using too much features all at the one time, but I just think the battery could have been a little bit better. Now you can get the battery grip for this, so you can do add on extra bit of life onto your camera, but I just think battery could have been just a tiny bit better. So besides a few things here and there, this is an absolutely fantastic camera. It is beautiful, it holds really nice, and it does perform extremely well. For me, it's not the type of camera I would have because I need those higher ISO ranges and the bigger sensors, so I do. But I know this camera would be ideal for somebody out there. So I hope this video was useful to you. Have a look through at some of the other images that I was taking throughout Belfast. Yes, they are edited up, they have been processed, but color wise, you know, they have been turned out really nicely, and I'm really happy with the images in general. So once again, I hope this video was useful to you. If this is the camera for you, let me know in the comments down below, or if you have this camera already, do let me know as well. What do you think of it? How long have you had it? What are your thoughts on it? And while you're at it, do like, share, press that wee subscribe button so that you can stay up to date with future videos. I have to now give this camera back to Panasonic, but it has been a great run with this, and I'm very thankful that you took the time to watch this review. Until then, take care, have a great day.